Welcome to Spring Insanity here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. It is March 16th, 2023, and we are going to kick it live here for the next 2 hours with you, talking a lot of Dynasty fantasy football. I'm your host, Eric Balkman, from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the Road of His High Stakes Lowdown. Want to welcome in my guest co-host this evening. You know him from analytics of Dynasty.com. You know him from Footballguys.com. You, of course, know him from the Football Guys Dynasty podcast. We actually just had his co-host on here on these airwaves a couple weeks ago, Chad Parsons. Follow him on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty. Jordan McNamara, welcome in, man.
I got to say, Eric, of all your accomplishments, to actually get Chad on another podcast is probably like right up there with the best of them. So your recruiting skills are highly commended by that performance.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. You know, anytime we get a unicorn like him to do a different podcast, it's fantastic. And I'm glad we got you tonight too, because we learned a lot from Chad. I expect that we're going to learn just as much, if not more, tonight from you as well. Hey, if anybody's interested and you're looking to draft right now, you can win $25,000 in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, $125 entry fee right now. That's at myffpc.com. Also at myffpc.com. You win $5,000 in the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament, just a $35 entry fee. Again, myffpc.com. Both of these tournaments are going to go all the way up until the NFL draft. Best ball slim rules. There's no kickers. There's no defenses. 20-round draft, 14-week regular season, and 3 weeks of playoffs when we crown a champion after week 17. We have drafts going with 30-second timers, 60-second timers, 2-hour timers, and 6-hour clocks as well. While you are there, why don't you adopt some dynasty teams? And we're going to give you some good reasons why. In fact, Jordan's going to lay it on the line of how to rebuild dynasty teams that are in need of it. We have plenty of orphans. MyFFPC.com is where you can pick up on those. The leagues themselves start at $77 and they go up to $2,500. However, a lot of those leagues have reduced price orphans. So a $77 one might be half price or even less than that. We might even have some dollar teams on there right now if you want to take on a challenge. A lot of those, and I always bring this up every week, a lot of people who orphan dynasty teams, it's not just because the team is bad. Sometimes people get new jobs. They get fired from jobs. They get new wives. They get ex-wives. They get new families, stuff like that. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it. So make sure you're checking that out again at myffpc.com. The man behind the glass tonight is Bennett Carroll. And shout out to him for running everything, making sure it goes smooth tonight. Let's kick things off with a lot of the news that's been going on in the NFL with free agency, Jordan. And obviously this affects dynasty trades more than anything else, really, or dynasty values, a lot of these players. So Jeremy Fowler from ESPN reported that the Panthers apparently, and I guess they could still bring back Deontay Foreman, although that's unlikely now that they just inked former Eagles running back Miles Sanders to a 4-year, $25 million contract. Sanders turns 26 in May, and he gets to hook up with his old running back coach, Deuce Staley, who's no longer in Detroit. He's in Carolina, assistant head coach and running backs coach for Frank Reich there. 1,268 rushing yards, 11 touchdowns last year. Again, this is with the Eagles. So there is something to be said for that, as his offense in Carolina will be much less octane. It seems like Chuba Hubbard is going to back him up. But for his dynasty value right now, it's a lesser offense, but maybe more work, Jordan. How do you view Miles Sanders now as how you viewed him when he was still a Philadelphia Eagle?
Yeah, I mean, one of the big questions that I had coming into this offseason was what was going to happen with the running back numbers. And to give you an idea, like the 4 contracts that we've seen Sanders, Montgomery, Jamal Williams, and actually Alexander Madison. Alexander Madison in every other year, basically dating back to 2019, would be the second biggest guaranteed contract that has been given out to a running back in free agent. So he's 4th in this class. So just to contextualize, that's kind of where we're at. I had a lot of questions about kind of where these guys would land. I didn't know, right? With a pretty good running back class coming in the free agent market, you know, we know teams are paying less at running back. Like, it was a really interesting offseason. Teams have paid up, you know, relative to what they've done in recent classes, reacting to it being a pretty good class. So that's notable, I think, for Miles Sanders, and I wasn't sure how a team would necessarily react to him. The question for him, I mean, he's kind of in that late running back 2 type range. I suspect that will move up now that he's gotten this contract. You're going to get him, like, I think he deserves to probably go ahead of guys like Joe Mixon. He's got more security than a guy like J.K. Dobbins, for example. So I think he's going to start creeping up the board. My overall question would be, like, what's his ceiling? Right. You look at him as a player, he just hasn't done a ton of receiving work, right? He had 509 yards as a rookie and 50 catches, and then he hasn't cracked 200 yards since then. So in an offense that's probably not going to be this rushing dominant team because they're going to, I think, struggle a bit. I kind of wonder, like, how much can he ultimately churn out, right? Is it kind of just low end running back one type production at a ceiling? And can you replicate that going other ways? You know, if you're going to have to pay running back 14 through 16 prices for that in Dynasty, is that really return in value in that range of the draft?
What about if somebody in your Dynasty league, you need a running back, they offer you Miles Sanders, and you have to give up, say, like the 203 or the 202. And we'll formulate this in an FFPC Dynasty, obviously shallow rosters on there. 202, 203, is that a fair price for Miles Sanders right now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd rather have Miles Sanders than that. I mean, you're hoping for something like lesser than that with that pick, right? You're hoping for a guy that gets an opportunity to be a starter, where Sanders right now is a starter, right? And so, especially with you don't have a long runway with those picks, right? You've got a short roster, you got to sort of churn them, right? You got to be very selective on who you're going to develop at those costs, right? Taking a guy like Miles Sanders right now in your format definitely fits with that type of price point.
David Montgomery is staying in the NFC North, but he is going to go northeast to Detroit. Tom Pelissero on Twitter from the NFL Network had this, that the Montgomery is now signed with the Lions, 3 years, $18 million. He gets $11 million guaranteed. It doesn't sound like Jamal Williams is going to be coming. Well, we know he's not coming back to Detroit. We'll get to him in a little bit. So it seems like Montgomery is going to take the spot for Jamal Williams on this team. Good for him that he got $11 million guaranteed from the Lions. You look at Montgomery has never been like a breakaway type running back, but he can catch the ball out of the backfield. A lot of questions come to my mind on this. We'll start with Montgomery. Number one, what do you think his role is going to be there in Detroit as you compare it to what it was with Khalil Herbert in Chicago, Jordan?
You know, one of the things for Detroit that I think is interesting, and we don't usually think of them in this light, but they're going to be, I mean, this is a team that's going to be among the favorites in the NFC. They are the favorite to win the NFC North right now by a pretty good chunk of odds. And all three teams have serious questions in that division. They have the best odds to win it in terms of the betting market. And with that comes, we're going to have to run, right? Like, this isn't a team that's ever had to really, hey, we're going to have to run assault games. That's not how we've ever had to think of them. However, really good offense with a team that should be playing ahead of teams both in their division. And if you look around, like, I think that they rank pretty high in the NFC just generally. And so I think as you look at this, right, Swift has never really been that guy, right? He had 33 carries in a game like 18 months ago. And then he's had basically double digit carries like less than 5 times since then. Right. So this isn't a guy who has really done that in his career. And so they want to bring in a guy. I think Williams at this point in his career is probably not that guy, right? He's probably not a 3-down guy that can sort of do both. Where Montgomery, you can question his long speed. You can question some of that. I think he's the perfect type of player to play to the quality of the offense, right? Probably not going to be that additive, but he's not going to hold you back. And in an offense that ranks second in terms of expected running back points last year, that's pretty interesting from a fantasy perspective. Again, I don't think he's right at his ceiling. I think DeAndre Swift is better, is a better football player, but there's serious questions about how much they trust him at this point. And I think Montgomery can basically do everything, where there's been a lot of questions about if Swift will be able to hold up under that type of workload.
And I think what's interesting here is Montgomery is the newsmaker, right? That he goes to Detroit, but I think a lot of the high stakes players want to know, okay, well, what do I do with DeAndre Swift now? Because when it looked like Jamal Williams was going to leave, and he did, now you have a situation where it should have been wheels up for Swift, and it doesn't look like it was. And quite frankly, even with Jamal Williams, it was never wheels up with Swift. They never seemed to trust him enough to give him a big workload. The talent is what we've been salivating about, ever since Swift was a rookie, and we're taking him high in those rookie drafts. But now it comes to be down where this was supposed to be his year. If Williams goes, now they bring in Montgomery. And now what do dynasty players need to do with Swift? Do you sell what you can get for him? Are you buying shares of him, or are you just holding on to see what happens?
Yeah, I mean, I'd be interested to kind of see what some trades look like in the coming days. In particular, I'm pretty bullish on Montgomery's landing spot, right? For a lot of the reasons that I just said, and I think that there's real reason to have caution for Swift. I mean, this is a big running back contract, right? This is a big
Mhm.
contract for a free agent running back, right? I mean, this ranks
Absolutely.
in like the top 5 or 6 of the past like 5 years. Like this is a big contract in terms of a guy actually hitting free agency. So that absolutely moved the needle. Again, I wasn't sure how teams were going to react to David Montgomery. Well, now we know, right? That was a pretty good contract, and like we have seen Swift have a lot of questions, right? I think one of the things I was kind of optimistic about was, hey, maybe he's losing Deuce Staley as his running back coach, and there's maybe some sense of optimism. Hey, a fresh start with a new coach, and those things will be a little bit more optimistic. That hasn't really been that already. We have seen that like they want to bring in another guy, so that stuff has given me some pause where with Swift. But again, I think he's the type of player that can swing for a high ceiling type performance again. But like, I wonder if Miles Sanders is going to creep up next to him in terms of price. I mean, there's
Mhm.
two guys that are kind of going to converge, I think, directionally in the middle there in the teens, maybe even in the later teens with a guy like Swift. At that price point, I think he's got the ability to really beat that.
And Swift, refresh my memory. I mean, he is younger than Sanders, right? I mean, he's got a year or two on Sanders, I believe.
Yeah, Swift will play this year, I believe, at 24, and Sanders will play it at 26. They're about a
Okay,
year, like almost a year and a half, maybe a little bit more than that in terms of actual
got it.
age difference.
Okay. Replacing or Montgomery is replacing Jamal Williams in Detroit. Jamal Williams is now going to be taking his talents to the Big Easy as he will be a New Orleans Saint this coming year. 3 years, $12 million. I think it was 8 million. Yeah, 8 million in guaranteed money. And 17 touchdowns. I mean, he led the NFL in rushing touchdowns last year, and obviously he brings in a certain skill set that may be replacing Mark Ingram, who is on the wrong side of 30. We have question marks about Alvin Kamara there as well. How much is he going to play? When he does play, how successful is he going to be there, given how we kind of underwhelmed last year? The Saints gave Kamara a career high in carries in 2021, and he almost topped it in 2022. Now it looks like Williams will be, I would think, the lead guy there. What do you do in Dynasty for him? Because Williams is going to be he turns 28 in about 2 weeks. So he's getting up there as well. But what do you do with Williams in your dynasty leagues right now? Is this a guy that like, oh, I'm a running back away, I'm going to give up a pick to get him? Or is this a guy that maybe you should be selling because now the perceived value of Jamal Williams in New Orleans is going to be at its highest, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I think he's really like on that injury away type of role, right? Again, are you ever going to feel great about starting him? Probably if Kamara's hurt, right? But
Mm-hmm.
in other games, or if Kamara's out of the game, right? If he's suspended or otherwise not playing, you're probably feeling pretty good about Jamal Williams. But even last year when he led the league in rushing touchdowns, like, did you ever feel great at any given week throwing him out there? Like you didn't feel like it wasn't a warm and cozy feeling, right? You were kind
Right.
of hoping for a touchdown, or otherwise it was a pretty low level game. This is an offense that in the post Sean Payton era has kind of dropped off in terms of the expected points for running backs, right? They've gone
Mm-hmm.
away. They've become much more run centric, have kind of not thrown the ball to the same extent. As a result, like, it's more touches for the running back position, but it's not the optimized receiving looks that we were getting. And I think that's I don't think Kamara has been substantially worse, and I don't think he's been that much worse than he was. It's just a worse situation, right? I think
Okay.
that's the big thing. So again, I think Kamara is probably an interesting spot to buy low, right? Because I do think he still possesses some of those high ceiling opportunities. I just don't think that this offense has really gotten out of its way. Now that, I mean, we can poke fun at Derek Carr a little bit, but I think with his, uh, you know, I think he lifts this offense above a place where they felt comfortable with Andy Dalton, with Jameis Winston, right? I mean, Dalton was pretty good last year, and they walked away from him like without much thought and brought in Derek Carr. I think that probably tells you something about what their offensive design is going to be.
So with Kamara, like who would you be willing to pay more for in a dynasty league right now? Is it Kamara or is it Jamal Williams?
Kamara, because like I think Kamara's got, like I think he's got top I don't know if he's got running
because
back
of
one
those
upside.
that ceiling is much higher with him, right?
Yeah, right. I mean, this is a player that could go 60, 70 catches, and right, we've seen him get some of that optimized work down in the red zone, even from a receiving perspective, right? So again, I think that he has that in the bag. Where I think I'm a Jamal Williams fan, but he has limitations in terms of ceiling, right? His ceiling games are really going to be 2 rushing touchdown games, as opposed to something like Kamara, where he could score 25 points without scoring a touchdown, right? Like we've seen those types of performances from him as well. So those would be kind of my angle on. I would rather take a ceiling swing on a guy like Kamara, because I think ultimately Jamal Williams is a little bit more replaceable.
We have a situation where the first 3 players we talked about all switch teams. Sanders moves from Philly to Carolina. David Montgomery from Chicago to Detroit. Jamal Williams from Detroit to New Orleans. But this next one I want to talk about, I think, is equally as interesting, even though he stayed with his current team, and that is Alexander Mattison. 2 years, $7 million to remain in Minnesota. Now, Dalvin Cook, according to multiple reports, apparently he's garnered some trade interest across the NFL. And the Vikings, it's not like they're awash in cash. To get rid of his contract would probably help them out financially. Mattison, 404 carries, 1,670 yards, and 11 touchdowns since he was drafted by the Vikings in 2019. That's obviously playing second fiddle to Dalvin Cook. He's rushed for 300-yard games as well. Now, I guess we're working in kind of a short window here right now, Jordan. If you're looking to strike while the iron's hot in regards to Mattison, knowing that the status of Dalvin Cook could change rapidly within the next 24 or 48 hours. What do you do with Alexander Mattison right now? Are you willing to try to acquire him to see if he's the lead back, or is there just still too many moving parts in Minnesota, understanding that they could sign a veteran or maybe draft somebody that maybe the lead role for Mattison in Minnesota doesn't actually have that great a chance of actually happening?
I mean, I think this is a significant contract for a running back, right? When you look at this, like this in most other years, so in the past 5 years, this would rank as the second biggest running back contract. So already you're just in terms of guaranteed money. Like for example, there was $5.5 million in the Todd Gurley deal when he went to Atlanta, right? There's more guaranteed money in this over 2 years for Madison. But again, the guarantees are bigger than that Gurley deal was. Again, that was on only 1 year there, but you get the idea. Like this is a lot of money to commit to a running back. This is a team that is in a lot of cap problems, right? And Delvin Cook, for all intents and purposes, released a going away message on his Twitter account. We've seen that those get rescinded or whatever, but he's basically said goodbye, right? I think there's enough smoke there to say there's probably Cook out the door, right? Again, he's dealing with an injury. I didn't realize this, that he's actually due it tomorrow. We're recording this on Thursday night. Obviously, tomorrow he's due a roster bonus, but he's actually injured and won't pass a physical. So they're going to have to pay it to him no matter what, basically, because it's apparently guaranteed for injury, was what I read. So I thought tomorrow was kind of the drop dead day. It doesn't look like that's actually true. But I think, in the coming weeks here, there's been enough smoke to say that they're probably moving on from Dalvin Cook. Again, what do they sort of backfill with? This is a team that you could convince me rolls with Alexander Mattison, Ty Chandler, and Kenny Nwangwu as a top 3 and says, we don't need to spend up at running back outside of what we have. And in that world, that's pretty interesting, So I'm a Mattison fan, and I think maybe, I think he's got two-way ability in a bigger ceiling role than a guy like Jamal Williams does, right? So, am I paying a second for him, right? I think that can definitely return value. You're hoping at worst he's an injury away guy, right? At best he's a big time, he's a running back 1 on this team with I think top 10 upside for a ceiling this season.
And Madison's crushed it in multiple starts for Dalvin Cook. He hasn't always crushed it.
There's one start where he didn't. There's
Right.
one start where he didn't. It was the Kirk Cousins implosion game. And I'll tell you a funny story. I actually went and I started him everywhere that week. Madison's like been my most rostered player for a long time. And I actually went outside that day and I ended up splitting like an entire pile of wood. And I nicknamed my axe Maddie the Axe because I was so upset about what Kirk Cousins did to Alexander Madison. So my axe is actually named Maddie the Axe because of that Kirk Cousins game. So we don't need to bust her out in anger anymore. We're going to be celebrating.
So has Maddie the Axe still split wood for you since that game?
She has, but never in rage at Kirk Cousins quite the way it was that night.
It's all about positivity. It's bringing those positive
celebratory.
vibes
It's been celebratory most of the time for Madison since then. Yeah, it's been pretty good.
So regards to Dalvin Cook, this is a guy that was a high value dynasty asset not that long ago. Now with the shoulder surgery kind of complicating things, you think he could be released. Either way, the Vikings have to pay him this money because he's going to fail his physical if that is the case. But what do you do with Dalvin Cook? Because now I feel like if the people that either drafted him or traded for him are probably going to think like, okay, I'm selling for 60 cents on the dollar, 65 cents on the dollar here if I get rid of him now. Is it smart to hold on to him and maybe trade him later when we get some more positive news? Or I guess Dalvin Cook, for me, Jordan, I'm kind of in a quandary of like how to handle this guy in my dynasty leagues right now.
Yeah, I mean, he's starting to hit the age peak. And again, I think the reason that they'd be moving on probably isn't as much to do about Dalvin Cook as it is the size of his contract, right? It's more Dalvin Cook's contract than it is necessarily his performance. I mean, he has 4 straight 1,100-yard rushing seasons. So, and actually like some of the additional stuff, like some of the, yards after contact, for example, he was above his career average last year. So he's kind of fallen off the last 4 years as a receiver, right? That would be one thing that you might kind of pick at. But again, you're looking in a range like that's that mid running back 2 range, right? So call it Derrick Henry, Swift, Cook, Dameon Pierce, Dobbins, Mixon, Sanders, like that type of range. It's kind of pick your adventure in there. What type of bet do you want to make? I mean, at this point, you're kind of hoping for one big season from that range. Like that's historically that price point. Like if you get a top 12 season from there, like that's a successful pick typically in that range. So that's kind of stuff you're looking for. I mean, I think Dalvin Cook, of all the players in that range, I feel the most confident that would be true. Mm-hmm. But I think more so than Dalvin Cook falling off, like he's getting to the age where he's going to start cresting and it's on the downslope of his prime. But I don't think it's necessarily Dalvin Cook getting cut because he's fallen off. It's more the contract isn't worth that. And that's he's from a prior regime and all that stuff. A prior regime paid him and now they have to flip the script forward on this franchise. So I think that's more of it. And if that creates an opportunity we might, the dynasty community might think that, hey, there's he's getting cut. So we have to think of him worse. That might actually create a buying opportunity for him. Right. So I'm kind of I wouldn't be necessarily caught in that trap. Just it's more of a football decision for them that it necessarily is Dalvin Cook, being 60% of what he was at his peak or something like that.
Yeah, that's good info. Like, so obviously, what I came into this talking to you and I kind of had a preconceived notion of what you're going to say about Kamara and Cook, and you kind of said the complete opposite and making perfect sense while doing it. So I think there is something to be said for, we think about declining assets and normally that's not necessarily the greatest thing to acquire in dynasty. And we're not saying that Kamara and Cook are necessarily declining. Maybe they've peaked, but that's a little bit different than declining. And certainly they can help a lot of teams out this year if you do end up going out and acquiring them. Now, as we shift from Minnesota over to the AFC and Denver, they made a move this week. Mike Garafolo from the NFL Network reporting that Samaje Perine leaves Cincinnati to sign with the Denver Broncos 2 years, $7.5 million. Now, this is interesting because Perine potentially could have had a bigger role, and I'll get your thoughts on Joe Mixon here shortly, but he potentially could have had a bigger role in Cincinnati this year if the Bengals end up moving on from Mixon. But he decides to go to Denver, who drafted Javonte Williams last year and who was looking pretty good until he shredded his knee. And I say shredded his knee because the reports are it wasn't just a simple ACL tear. There was something more going on that it's been a lot of damage. We've heard reports saying, yeah, we hope he's ready for the start of the regular season. I think those are aggressive. I think those are optimistic. I don't think they're necessarily realistic. Enter Perine, who not only has shown the ability to be a first and second down banger, but a guy who can catch passes out of the backfield. And maybe at a minimum, that's what he does in Denver. I kind of like the opportunity for Perine right here because I'm very bearish on Javonte Williams. We'll talk about Williams in a second, but your thoughts on Perine here from a dynasty perspective, Jordan?
Yeah, so from a dynasty perspective, you hit a lot of those right on the head. I mean, I think it's interesting when you compare the contracts. He actually got more in terms of the top dollar amount. It's the same years as Madison, but he got less than half of the guarantees, right? So that kind of, if you were to sort of put that on a scale of how you're going to think about these two guys, you might think of it, that Perine's more in line with insurance on Javonte Williams and necessarily taking Javonte Williams' job. Now, I think Perine, see the benefit of a guy like Perine, he doesn't have necessarily the explosive stuff, but he can really do everything, right? He can do, he can pass catch, which is funny because Mixon was the pass catching centric guy when he was at Oklahoma. And then Perine came in and was actually doing that better this past year at Cincinnati. It's just a weird confluence of how those things came together. But he can catch, he can block, he can run, right? He's a dependable running back. And when you don't necessarily know what you're getting out of Javonte Williams, there's certainly value in that. Again, I would view him kind of in the line of, similar to a guy like Jamal Williams, because I think he's, it's an injury away type situation. And we've seen like Sean Payton's expected running back production is elite, right? I mean, that is something that he has consistently done in terms of the points that his running backs have scored. It's about 30 points per game in his tenure in New Orleans, which is just an absurd amount, right? That's at the top of the position. So right there, it is a lucrative spot. And so Perine's going to go in there. And again, we've seen him maybe not necessarily in, 10, 12 game increments, but 3-4 game increments. We've seen him be in this past year, certainly would suffice as a starter and gave you an edge when he played and Mixon was out, right? And so again, I think a lot of the running back position is what type of bets do you want to make? You kind of hit it on the head with, you thought my reaction to Cook and Kamara would be a little bit different. These guys are priced so cheap right now, right? You're not making this bet at running back 6, right? You're making it at running back 16. Right, you're making it, and with some of these other guys, and even further on than that. But right, that's a substantially different bet, right? That is a substantially different opportunity cost. It's a substantially different, threshold for success, right? So that's really, I think, when you're thinking about this, like, what are you trying to accomplish with the picks? I mean, Perine has a very open window into being a very relevant player. And again, Javonte Williams, that knee injury, I call it like the complicated ACL, right? I'm not going to play doctor, but it's more than just a pure ACL. By the way, like that caused him to fall, but it didn't cause Breece Hall to fall, right? Which is interesting because Breece Hall is up at the top of the position. It's the same. Again, I'm not playing doctor here, but it's the same type of just not a straight ACL. It's more complicated than that. And that was always curious to me that people bailed on Javonte Williams, but didn't on Breece Hall. I think it's an interesting perspective.
So as far as Javonte Williams goes right now, is there something to be said for knowing that if you buy him right now in Dynasty, you are probably not going to have access to his stats at week 1 of the season? Is there a buying opportunity with Javonte Williams right now, or are you concerned about maybe the long-term effects for, the other thing to bring up with Williams is, just because he comes back this year, we've seen this from plenty of running backs, they don't necessarily always have a great year in their first year back from an ACL tear. And when you consider that Williams was more, maybe it's not going to be the greatest 2023 season. So if you trade for him now, you might even be just really buying him for 2024. Is there a buying opportunity there, or are you more than likely going to be, peeing in the wind, for lack of a better term, and trying to acquire him because the current owner for Javonte Williams is not really going to be willing to let him go for the discount you're seeking?
Yeah, I mean, he started to slide, right? And he was one of those running backs where he was up top 3, top 4 running back at points last year, which I thought was just too much, right? I just thought that that was way too expensive. And so he's starting to slide now into the late running back 1. I mean, he's down to, at certain spots, he's down to like running back 10, 11, 12. And when you start thinking about that, like that's much more palatable. Again, that gets much more into the, right, once you get beyond really like the Najee Harris spot in the draft, like it then becomes, all right, what type of bet do you want to make, right? Najee Harris is really the last guy I would consider that's got multiple years of like feeling pretty good about security and Dynasty ADP at the moment. would you rather take Javonte Williams or swing on a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, right? I think that's it. Stevenson's older, and there's a little bit less security probably there for him contractually and all that. But I think Ramondre Stevenson's on a list of guys that could finish as running back 1 overall, right? So what type of bet do you want to make? What are you trying to accomplish? I mean, it's tough for me to say that he's not priced right. I probably would wait and take a different bet. But again, he fits in a range of guys that if you sort of put 10 of them in a blender and they came out in a different order each time, I couldn't really pick too many problems with it.
Hey, great stuff there on not only P. Ryan, but Javonte Williams as well. I want to continue this conversation because there are so many other free agent signings that we haven't gotten to. The more things change, the more they stay the same, especially in the Miami backfield. That's coming up. The Eagles may have a new starting running back, and they're the defending NFC champs. This could be huge for them. You just mentioned Ramondre Stevenson. He has a new teammate in the backfield. We're going to talk about James Robinson, and we'll get into some of these other positions too. Jacoby Myers. Why did Vegas not have to pay what a lot of us thought they would need to pay in order to procure his services for 2023? And then Juju Smith-Schuster, Super Bowl champ in Kansas City. Now he's joining James Robinson in New England. We're going to get the Dynasty fallout on that. He's Jordan McNamara. Check out all his work. Analytics of Dynasty.com, at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter, and of course, Footballguys.com and the Football Guys Dynasty Show with Chad Parsons. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. We're going to step out just for a second. We'll be back in just a couple of minutes with the Dynasty talk rolling on here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
Talk about your picks and your fantasy teams on Better Sports Network.
The importance of checking out the site that you're playing on. Default rankings of these sites. A lot of times they don't get updated. I know from experience. I used to write default rankings for the NFBKC, the basketball version of the NFBC. I'd write these default rankings in June for the NBA, before the NBA draft, before free agency opened up. And guess what? I was never asked to write an update article or update the default rankings. This happens a lot. Maybe if there's something obvious, it gets updated. Aaron Judge, for some reason, hurts his back. Maybe they make that change. Just maybe. But you don't know that. And that's why it's just so important that you show up to your draft room or you do that pre-draft prep. We're all busy. We know we're about to devote a lot of time to our fantasy baseball drafts. Why not spend the extra 20 to 25 minutes to invest properly in your team, to go and see which of those players are way down default rankings? They're going to be different on all of these sites, and you're going to be looking at them and going, maybe their analysts think a certain player who shouldn't be in the top 100, who should be maybe even not even the top 200, will be in that top 100. You got to check that out. You got to know where you're playing, just like you got to know your format when you sign up for the league. It's just so crucial, and people just skip right over it. You think it's cool to show up to the draft room 3 minutes before the draft. Well, number one, it's not cool because the commissioner's trying to make sure it is organized, especially me, who runs auctions. You can't, it's one thing if someone doesn't show up for the snake draft, oh well, doesn't ruin it for everyone. Auctions, you can't have someone not show up. Auto bidding, auto auctioning, it ruins the sanctity of those drafts here, which is why I always recommend, hey, make it easy on your commissioner. Don't make them send those texts there. It's annoying. You shouldn't have to do that. Don't wait till the last minute and get in there about 20, 25 minutes before so you can just look up and down the entire default rankings list so you can make a queue out of that, Ron. And the reason I keep saying this is because people still show up 2-3 minutes before the draft, and that's it. In fact, in one of my auctions, people were asking me where certain players were, and I go, did you search their name? No, I just got in. Well, that's no excuse right there. That's your own fault. I mean, you're organized, so you're a hard person to ask here.
You're getting those questions. This is your preschool league, right? People don't know how to search player names.
People freak out. They don't think. That's the problem. Because they show up 2 minutes before the draft. That's why.
The Playbook with Fensty and Ronis, presented by FantasyAlarm.com. Weekdays at 5 Eastern on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
We have breaking news here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network at 7:34 p.m. on a Thursday. We're going to get to that in a second because it pertains to what we were just talking about with Dynasty Fantasy Football. Don't forget, here at BSN, we're getting you ready for the upcoming baseball season with the Better Baseball Preview. From fantasy baseball to MLB betting and the newest baseball cards for 2023, you can access our exclusive content for free right now at bettersports.com. That's bettersports.com, featuring some of the best baseball minds in the industry. Adam Ronis, Ray Flowers, Kyle Elfrink, Cody Decker. Get player profiles, prop bets, and futures, sleepers, and busts, fantasy draft strategy, collectibles, and more at no cost. Please register with your name and email at bettersports.com right now and get instant access plus notifications when new features are going to be released. Go to bettersports.com and sign up for the Better Baseball Preview at bettersports.com. Jordan McNamara at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter, analytics at dynasty.com, footballguys.com, Football Guys Dynasty Show. Joining me here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, we were just talking about this. The musical chairs at running back continue. According to Jordan Schultz from The Score, NFL insider there, he is saying that per source, D'Onta Foreman is headed to the Chicago Bears, 1 year, $3 million. So on the surface here, Jordan, does not look like a ton of cash for Foreman, but a lot of people who are all about Khalil Herbert, all of a sudden there's a dent in their plans here. How do you see this and how you handle it when you're trying to manage your dynasty roster that, you know, maybe features D'Onta Foreman, maybe features Khalil Herbert, maybe neither one of them, maybe both of them? How do you handle these guys now?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't think that there was a real good chance that Foreman would get through with basically the competition there, right? They brought in Travis Homer, but I thought that there was something more coming. They have a lot of cap space, right? They don't have an established offense, right? They need players. So I thought there was more coming. Is this the end of it, or is this still going on? Right. That would be the question that I would have, right? If this is the end of it for Herbert, you feel like he's got a fighting chance to win a starting job.
Mm-hmm.
If this is a sign of more things to come, right? If they go kind of the route of which, for example, the Jets went a couple of years ago, right, where they brought in actually Breece Hall on top of Michael Carter, right? That's where this can go bad. I don't think that they should be out of the business of bringing in players, right? They need to see what Justin Fields can offer, right? So if it's a running back that can catch passes, if it's a receiver, right, if it's a tight end, right at the same time, it was announced that they brought in Robert Tonyan. So we've seen them hit wide receiver, we've seen them hit running back, we've seen them hit tight end. I wouldn't be surprised to see them go the Jets route and hit them again in the draft, right? That's what the Jets did last year in the draft, and keep surrounding Justin Fields with receiving talent and pass catchers, and I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen. So I don't think that Herbert's necessarily insulated, especially with some of the guys we've already been talking about.
Well, and Matt Deutsch chiming in right now in the YouTube chat. He likes this move for the Bears. He says that Herbert needs a spell. He needs somebody to help him handle that full load there. He thinks the same thing it needs to happen with Tony Pollard in Dallas. We're going to get to the Ezekiel Elliott stuff in a little bit. But regarding Foreman here, do you view that Herbert is still the starter there? And Foreman's just going to come in to be, I was thinking about the old Packers rotation that we have seen dating back to the Super Bowl year in 2010. It always seemed like they would give, and they're doing it now with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon. It seems like Jones goes 2 series, and then you'll see the Dillon series, then 2 more series from Jones, then another series from Dillon. Is that the likely rotation that you foresee happening with Herbert and Foreman, or is this more of a 50-50 split?
Yeah, I don't know. Right. And that's probably one of the things that gives me pause. You look at some of the advanced stats, like they had, over at PFF, for example, they had very similar grades last year. So I don't think it's necessarily outside of the realm of possibility that Foreman can compete with Herbert. Right. You look at some of the advanced metrics and they perform pretty close. Right. So I think that Foreman's shown that he has a fighting chance to win battles, right? He beat out Chuba Hubbard, had very similar pedigree from a guy like Khalil Herbert. So you start looking at these things, and I don't think D'Onta Foreman's drawing dead, right? And again, it might be one of those things like if there's a big spread, right? The way I usually treat these in Dynasty, where I don't have a great feeling on a situation, if there's a big spread in cost, I'm interested in the cheaper guy, typically, right? If I think it's if it's not that close, or if it's really close for me and I don't really have a strong feeling and the cost is a big spread, I'm really interested in the cheap guy because that usually means there's probably some value there if I don't know.
Our producer and one of the resident Bear fans here at Better Sports Network, Bennett Carroll, thinks that Foreman feels like the backup to Herbert. Travis Homer is going to be the pass blocker. Obviously, they still got Tristan Ebner in there. And the other thing too to keep in mind is what you just said, Jordan. They could be drafting somebody else too. So this may not be settled in this Bears backfield. More on that, and obviously keep it right here on the Better Sports Network. Not only for this show, but obviously Garrett Price and Dynasty Nerds are going to be talking about this next, and we'll have full coverage on not only Deontay Foreman, but all the free agency signings all day tomorrow here on the Better Sports Network. You look at the Dolphins, Jeff Wilson and Raheem Mostert coming back. Obviously, both these guys had played with Mike McDaniel before 2022. They continue to play with him in 2022, and now they're going to continue to play with him in 2023 as well. Do you think this is settled with Wilson and Mostert here? I think you can get both these guys pretty cheap if you like either one of them in Dynasty right now. And I think part of the reason, too, is, and I think I could be wrong, I think Gaskin is back there again this coming season. It's kind of a muddled mess there, and I think all these guys are going to have games where you're going to like to have them in your lineup, but it's kind of what you were saying about Jamal Williams earlier. Are you ever going to feel good about starting any of these guys? I'm not so sure.
That's exactly, you took kind of my thought right in front of me there. And they bring back Gaskin as well. So that's they're running it back from what they did last year. There's
literally
guys out there. Yeah, right. They've been linked to Delvin Cook, right? Like it wouldn't shock me if they went. We've seen in San Francisco that having incumbent running backs, paying incumbent running backs, having established guys hasn't stopped them from adding guys, right? It hasn't. It's that same Shanahan tree. I don't know if I can handle much more of Kyle Shanahan's shenanigans going on around the league in terms of running back handling, but we'll see. I mean, I don't necessarily think I rule them out, especially like they're not young either, right? It's actually decent money that they pay them, but it's not long term, and there's some pretty good depth at the position, so you could see them going, guys like Zeke, guys like, I don't know if he's necessarily a landing spot, but there's going to be a lot of guys there without, there's a chance Mixon gets cut, right? There's going to be a lot of guys out there that don't have, seats at the table when this whole thing sort of comes down. And so that's going to leave guys potentially being pretty cheap on the free agent market, I think, over the summer.
So one of the free agent signings I saw that stuck with me, and I'm like, this could be big. And then there was one thing that I saw, and I'm like, oh, maybe it won't be. The Philadelphia Eagles obviously decided to let Miles Sanders go. He's in Carolina. They decide that they're going to sign Rashad Penny from Seattle. He is a big-time breakaway threat. Rashad Penny has been throughout his career. He also is no stranger to the trainer's room as well. He has only played 42 games over the last 5 seasons. He only played 5 last year. Now, when he's healthy, in both 2021 and 2022, combine all those stats together, 6.2 yards per carry, 2.1 yards over expected during 2021. For context sake, nobody else was above 1.57 that year. You have Kenneth Gainwell, who is a talented pass catcher on this team. They just re-signed Boston Scott. Jalen Hurts, obviously, at the goal line, was deadly this past year for the Eagles. Lot to like here with Rashad Penny, except for this. It was a 1-year deal. It was $1.35 million and only $600,000 guaranteed. Boy, that slowed my roll on Rashad Penny quite a bit here, Jordan. As it's exciting to think of him as the starting running back, but I don't know how much faith Philly has in him when they're only going to give him that much money.
You realize they brought back Boston Scott for more money and more guarantees,
which is crazy to me, because like when you get excited about the Penny thing, and then you see what they're doing with Boston Scott, who was, I believe, signed before Penny, right? They got Scott back in the fold before Penny, and so now it was like it wasn't even a roller coaster. It was like straight up, and now it's like straight down for me for Penny.
Yeah, that is. Listen, I think with Penny, like the interesting thing is so the current active leader in rushing yards per carry is Nick Chubb at 5.2. That's among minimum qualifiers. That's 750 carries. Rashad Penny has averaged 5.7 yards per carry in his career. So a full half yard better than Nick Chubb. However, nowhere near qualifying for that minimum threshold, right? But that is an elite number, right? You look at some of the other stuff as well. Like there's some good stuff after contact, right? Broken tackle rate's pretty good, all that stuff. However, Derrick Henry and Josh Jacobs had more carries this year than Rashad Penny has had in his 5-year career. Okay. That is the level of that he has not played in his career. So that's the thing that I have with Penny. I think this is a really good shot for a contending team. Like, take an elite swing, right? Take a swing of a guy that can be a big time difference maker, right? Take that swing. I like that swing directionally from Philly. I just don't know. You're just kind of taking the same swing. You're hoping for a handful of starts at his cost, right? You just got to be careful not to pay a cost more than that, right? But you're hoping if you get 3 or 4 starts from Penny along the way and he's in the running back 30 range, that's probably paying for itself, right? If he's going to be running back 19, no, that's not the bet you want to make, you know?
Right.
So it's all price point, you know, it's price specific. You sort of get into that range of like, all right, I'm fine deeper at the running back position. I want to take bimodal bets. Okay. I either want to take bets of guys that are going to play and be in my lineup, or that I know I'm not going to play. Right. That's very different than the receiver position when you get into that range where it's like, maybe like 5 targets. Like, how good do I feel about that? Right. You're kind of just trying to figure out. I'd much rather take a swing. You know, I mentioned P. Ryan last year. I mean, my logo for Analytics Dynasty is actually Latavius Murray. I think it was the 2019 season where he went crazy in 2 games and had like a dominant 2-game stretch. Right. And those are the only 2 games he started. But you know what? You're probably 2-0. Off the back of Latavius Murray in those 2 games, back to back. I think it was week 6 and 7, 7 and 8, something like that, with New Orleans when Kamara was out, right? So those are the things that I'm shooting for. So guys like Penny can really offer that, but you have to be careful that you're not being priced into. Is it multi-year, or is it is it multi-game pricing, or is it kind of multi-year pricing in terms of security, right? In the 30s, I'm okay with it. Up in the higher 20s, something like that. I'm thinking you got other bets.
Speaking of other bets, New England made one this week in the running back position on their team. James Robinson, who formerly of the Jets, before that the Jacksonville Jaguars, and before that Illinois State, undrafted player in 2020. He gets a 2-year, $8 million contract, and he was awesome in 2020. 2021, it was bad for James Robinson dynasty owners like me. As I saw the Jaguars draft Travis Etienne in that first round, but then Etienne had that knee injury, and then Robinson had another pretty good 2021 until he got hurt and tear his Achilles, and I was kind of done with him at that point. But then he flashed in 2022, and he was pretty good. Then the Jaguars decided at the trade deadline that he didn't figure into their plans, traded him to the Jets, 29 carries, 85 yards, and then did not play in the last 5 games of the season, not because he was hurt, but because he was just a game day inactive, a healthy scratch. This is 2 years in a row, Jordan, that I made up my mind, okay, well, I got what I could out of James Robinson. When I have to cut down my roster, he'll be released. It didn't happen in 2022, and now it didn't happen in 2021, and now as we come up in the 2023 season, I'm like, okay, this is a guy that won't be on my roster. I'll cut him. But now in New England, they give him the money, and now he's, again, as you say, like an injury away type guy behind Ramondre Stevenson. Now I think there might be some juice there. I don't know what I would give up for him in dynasty leagues for him. I don't know how much is there, but I don't think I can cut him at this point. Not cut him, but not keep him on my roster when I have to cut down. I think Robinson is kind of interesting in New England, as most running backs seem to be each and every year there under Bill Belichick.
I go back to the same thing with Chicago, right? Is this the beginning of the running back additions, or is it the end of the running back additions there? Because I think that could be really telling. Again, I said earlier, I think Ramondre Stevenson, he is on a list of guys that could be the running back 1 overall in fantasy in 2023. He has the type of profile that could do that. If this is the way that they're going to back him up, I feel great about Ramondre Stevenson in 2023. If this is like, they're going to take someone on day 2 to sort of, continue to build out their committee, I don't love it. I mean, I think you look at Robinson last year. I mean, it's the 2nd worst PFF grade of any qualifying running back. I mean, he cratered in yards per route run. He cratered in yards after contact. I mean, he just completely plummeted right off a cliff. Really, it's gone straight down, basically, his career. Is some of that injury related? Probably. right? But does he get it back, right? How much does that threaten you is really the thing that I would think from Ramondre Stevenson. I don't think, like, I think it's, if he thinks he's going to go in there and take Ramondre Stevenson's job, I think he's got another thing coming for him, would be kind of how I'd process this. And I think Ramondre Stevenson, if you're looking at it and you're saying that's all you're going to do in terms of competition, I feel pretty good about it.
I want to shift to the focus to the receiver position now, and it's Jacoby Myers. I saw some stuff from some pundits out there before the free agency season this year that they thought Jacoby Myers would get something near what Christian Kirk got in free agency from Jacksonville last year. And I think part of the reason is his last year under the allegedly Matt Patricia led offense in New England, put up some pretty good numbers there. 67 catches, 800 yards, 6 touchdowns. In 2021, he did something similar to that. So this is a guy who wasn't a flash in the pan. He's done this now for a couple of years. He gets a 3-year deal. 21 million guaranteed, but it's only worth 33 million overall, which to me was a little bit like, oh, he couldn't have gotten more than that from somewhere. Maybe this is a case where he liked the idea of playing opposite Devontae Adams because a lot of the coverage is going to be funneled towards Adams, and now he's going to be able to take advantage of that. I'm not really sure, but Jacoby Myers is a guy that I think people in dynasty drafts, and I know in my dynasty drafts, Jordan, and share your experiences, please, but he always seemed like he was a better value on the stat sheet than his perceived value was in real life. Not a guy that people got excited about, yet he just put up numbers, every single year. He's the type of guy that you could probably use as if you play in the FFPC as a secondary flex, or perhaps a flex when you had bye week or injury issues. He just had such a high floor. And I think when you look at acquiring a guy like Myers, you can always get a deal on him because he never seems to fetch what he should. Now he signs the deal with Las Vegas, leaving New England there. He gets the 21 million guaranteed. He gets Adams on the other side of the field. And I still think you can get a deal on him if you want to acquire him in your dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I mean, this is a bad receiver class for free agencies, right? I mean, it's Juju, it's him, right? DJ Shark, we'll see, but Michael Thomas, we thought might be a name that was in this class, ends up not being in the free agent class. He ends up returning to New Orleans, and right, so you think like the shortage, it's just purely economics, right? There's a high demand for wide receivers. We've seen that, and there's a small supply, so the price should go up. And then you look, and it's like Juju Smith-Schuster and Jacoby Myers signed for basically like $11 million a year. After we've seen that's the Corey Davis contract from a couple of years ago, kind of before the big wide receiver breakout and costs. And you're like, I was kind of left like, wow. Like I was kind of left like, that's all. Like that was my reaction to that. I thought $15-16 million for both of those guys was plenty possible. I think, I kind of comp wide receivers to, there's different types of bets you want to make. Kind of, we talked about running back with receivers as well. I kind of comp Jacoby Myers to like a good middle reliever, right? Where you're going to put him out there kind of when you're kind of mopping up a game, right? He's more of like a long reliever where you're kind of, other things have gone wrong, right? He's not your first option. He might not be your second option, but he can service, he can sort of get you along and plug the hole where it exists, but not necessarily move the needle, right? That's kind of how I view him. And that's how I viewed him in New England. And I thought, like, there's a chance that if you put him with a good quarterback and a good offense, that he could be more than that. But now you're putting him on the other side of Devontae Adams. And I just, is he ever going to be 120, 130 target guy? And if he's not, I mean, how many wide receivers do we want to roster in your format?
Right.
I'd much rather, if I'm trying to pick off the flex, right? If I'm trying to win an FFPC league, I'm trying to roster a ton of running backs because I'm trying to do with what we talked about. I'm trying to hit those P-Ride weeks. I'm trying to hit the Jamal Williams start weeks when Kamara's out. I'm trying to hit the, that Latavius Murray stretch that I mentioned. Like I'm trying to hit those games because those can make a really big impact where the receiver really streaming a wide receiver in the flex is very replaceable ultimately. So that's kind of the I'm not really in on Myers and those types of receivers for that reason, even though I think he's probably gotten worse treatment than he deserves. I think he's a better football player than he probably is a fantasy football player, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense, and I'm totally with you on that. I think Alan Lazard fits that as well.
Yes.
We won't
That's a
get
great
into
one.
him tonight, but Alan Lazard is another guy that I think the Jets showed what his NFL worth was, whereas for fantasy football we don't get necessarily all that excited about him. I was pretty excited when I saw Juju Smith-Schuster sign with Kansas City Chiefs last year, and while he had a productive season, it was Patrick Mahomes, it was no Tyreek Hill, and he failed to get 1,000 yards, which is fine. But I was hoping that it would be more. Now he leaves Kansas City. He goes to New England, 3 years, $25.5 million. It's worth up to $33 million when you factor in what's the word I'm thinking of?
Incentives, yeah.
Incentives. I was going to
Yeah.
say expletives. I knew that was. I was about to utter an
Could
expletive.
factor in those too. We might factor in those.
That's right. Yes, thank you. So now he goes to New England, ostensibly replacing Jacoby Myers. I am, and I guess you could kind of make the case, what you just said about Jacoby Myers. I don't necessarily know that Juju Smith-Schuster is going to hit that 120, 130 target range. I don't necessarily think that he's maybe a high ceiling player. I think in our minds, after what we saw in his breakout in Pittsburgh, we still think he might be that player. I don't think he's that player anymore. Maybe he never was. And now he goes to New England, which should be a much, at least we think, a lower pass volume. We're not really sure about the quarterback there, but we do know it will not be Patrick Mahomes in New England. And while the contract is similar to Jacoby Myers, I'm actually less excited about this. I think, unlike Myers, I think Juju Smith-Schuster, he's got more of a pizzazz name value. And maybe we typically pay a little bit more for that. And maybe if you have Smith-Schuster on your team, you should be sending out offers to see what you get in exchange for him, because I got to think that in New England this year, he's not sniffing 900 receiving yards.
Yeah. So the interesting part is like, I kind of view this from the perspective of the Patriots, and you're like, all right, we had Jacoby Myers, and instead of paying him basically what he got paid, we're going to instead go get Juju Smith-Schuster and basically pay him the exact same amount of money, right? Pretty close to the same amount of money. And that's basically the decision that they made. Now, what's that say to us, right? What are they trying to tell us by doing that? I think it's that they view him as an upgrade. Again, is that true? Right? I mean, we could sort of quibble, but maybe they saw in Jacoby Myers a limited player that they didn't think that they could ultimately take a next step, and that they see in Juju Smith-Schuster a player that can, right? I think that would sort of be the pro Juju Smith-Schuster pitch in all of this. When you look at it, I mean, Jacoby Myers he played 14 games last year. He had 803 yards, about 6.6 targets per game. When you look in terms of like points per game, right around 30, that's right about where Juju Smith-Schuster was last year in terms of points per game scoring as well. Similar expectations, similar efficiencies. Myers was a little bit more effective. Juju performed more over expectation than anything. So I think all of those things, like when you're looking at them, like they feel very similar. But I think that maybe the Patriots view, instead of a 6.6 target per game guy, maybe they view Juju Smith-Schuster as a 7.5 target per game guy. And if that's the case, now we're talking, right? Because that starts adding up. That starts getting into the line of like, okay, we can play that on a weekly basis. We can sort of, I like to call those, instead of being middle relievers, I call those innings eaters, right? They just you put them in your lineup every week, and they just sort of take up that roster spot. They eat that start, and they're pretty dependable for you from the volume over the course of the season ends up working out pretty well. That's kind of the way that I view a guy like Juju Smith-Schuster, if he's going to be 7.5, 8 target guy. And I think if that's the investment that they made, right, that's kind of how I'm reading that. Again, I could be wrong. And again, it's trying to mind me Bill Belichick, which could totally send me into a tizzy. I wouldn't bet a lot on it if you're thinking about it, but that would kind of be the way I processed it anyways. And we'll see sort of what they offer in terms of Juju.
Getting back to Kansas City, the spot that Smith-Schuster vacated, we heard from Andy Reid. This was back just not too long after the Super Bowl. He said that Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, they're probably going to have bigger roles for Kansas City next season. And I look at it from the standpoint of, okay, they gave up, I think, a 3rd-round pick to acquire Toney from the Giants. They obviously invested, I think, a second-round pick into Sky Moore. So the draft capital is there for these guys. Tony was a former first-round pick too. What are you looking at for those guys right now in Kansas City? Because I feel like they could still sign a veteran. I don't know what difference maker is out there right now. They could draft somebody, right? But that's going to be a receiver in year one. And this isn't a great receiver class, at least comparatively speaking to the last few years. So now all of a sudden you're looking at, well, maybe it's Occam's razor here. Maybe it's Tony and maybe it's Moore. Do you like either one of those guys to have a breakout season in 2023, Jordan?
I think someone's probably going to be productive. I don't know. I mean, is it to the level of Juju Smith-Schuster? And then if that's the case, right, if they put the Juju Smith-Schuster stat line out there, have they really broken out? Is that a big season? You could sort of ask yourself, how much does it matter? But you look at it, I have definite concerns about Sky Moore, for example. He only, out of 725 dropbacks this past year, they had him run routes on 167 of them, which is a pretty low number. It's a pretty small percentage. Kadarius Toney ran 83 routes this season, right? So in terms of like projecting guys to make the leap, I think that someone's probably going to do it. I'm not sure who it's going to be. I'm sure they probably draft someone as well. Like they might be a team that goes back to we've seen them in season trade for guys, right? We've seen them go all different routes on these. I'm not necessarily sure who it's going to be. I think that the best, if the market will give you what you paid for Sky Moore last year, right? If you paid 110 for Sky Moore and you can get 110 today, I'd do it. I'd reset the clock, right? Given the fact that he didn't play much, he didn't play well, and there's an opportunity there. Yeah, I'd reset the clock.
I remember last year when I was drafting at like that 109, 110 in a lot of my drafts, and I ended up with Christian Watson because it always seemed like Sky Moore would go one pick ahead of me. And I have no Sky Moore Dynasty shares at all, but I have all this Christian Watson. And now, again, Joe Bryant always says, football guys, things change pretty fast around here, move pretty fast around here. and maybe Sky Moore has the breakout and Christian Watson founders with Jordan Love if he's a starting quarterback. But right now, I'm very thankful that I got Watson in all those rookie drafts as opposed to Sky Moore for sure. We're just getting started here, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to roll on to hour number 2. Coming up, we're going to talk about Ezekiel Elliott's future, what you do with him in your dynasty leagues. Tony Pollard, and what he's going to be able to do in Dallas this year. Is somebody else going to be added, or is it the Pollard show? We're going to get Jordan's thoughts on Joe Mixon in Cincinnati, or perhaps out of Cincinnati. We talked a little bit about the Bears backfield. I want to get your thoughts on DJ Moore as well. We'll probably parlay that into a Justin Fields conversation. And then Chase Edmonds just signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. How does that affect Rachaad White? We'll answer those questions and more. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with Jordan McNamara from analytics at Dynasty.com, Football Guys at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, and this is the Better Sports Network.
Talk sports with Lisa Ann and Rick Kamla Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on Better Sports Network.
Let me say something about Tiger. Tiger has had to redesign his entire swing. Tiger has a difference in the length of his legs because of that horrible accident. In golf, there's no hey, you can't walk the greens. You have to take a cart. So I assumed by day 3 on Sunday, the inflammation would start. He took a couple breaks where they take care of his back a little bit, but it is fascinating watching him. So it gave me this thought, is he that skilled at golf? Or is this a mental thing of dedication and determination? He is so dedicated to the sport that no matter what, he's relentless to it. And the dedication and determination goes to the golf, the swing, the playing, the walking, but it goes to his overall health. The average person who doesn't stay in great shape, gets in an accident like that, goes through multiple surgeries, is not recovering and going out there to walk. And that course has some pretty steep inclines, a lot of walking. I mean, how else can you factor these athletes, the Michael Jordans, the LeBrons, these players that their whole focus is really optimal health, optimal body skills, and then what comes next is being the best at what they do.
I think you just hit on why Tiger still has that drive. I don't know this, I don't know the man. It could just be love of the game. It could be, I want to make as much money as I can while playing. Could be all this stuff. But LA, a lot of people think Tiger Woods is the GOAT of golf. And I don't understand how you can be the GOAT of golf when you are 3 majors short of Jack Nicklaus. Okay. So like LeBron, I don't think he cares what guys like me say anymore, right? He's past Kareem. He thinks he's the GOAT. I mean, he's third on my list. He's in the debate. Many other people think he's the GOAT. He's not my GOAT. You know what I mean? So I wonder if Tiger is there, like LeBron, like, I don't care what the pundits, what the barbershops say. I'm the GOAT. I don't have to do anything more. This is all gravy. I wonder if Tiger looks at it that way.
I don't know what Tiger's mindset is in the GOAT status, but when players talk about what it's like to be at a tournament, when Tiger's playing versus when he's not, they'll tell you that they're on the greens and they can hear the roar 4 holes over, and that there is nothing that compares to the excitement of when he's present.
Better Sports Live, Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 Pacific, exclusively on Better Sports Network. Or listen whenever you want on the app with BSN On Demand. It's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
8:04 in the PM here, Eastern Time, on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show with the Better Sports Network right now. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. He's Jordan McNamara from analytics of Dynasty.com, Footballguys.com, as well as the Football Guys Dynasty show that he and Chad Parsons put out. Jordan, what's the schedule like for? Are you and Chad doing about 2 episodes a week on that year round?
Just one. We do every Tuesday night. Every Tuesday night we record. Yep, 9:30 every Tuesday night, and then once a week.
By the way, in addition to checking that podcast out, don't forget that we have the 2023 Sports Futures Draft here with the Better Sports Network, from March Madness all the way to the World Series, featuring picks and odds from the most exciting sporting events of the year. Corey Parson, Nando DeFino, the Better team of producers. You can join them to find out where the best values are in sports futures, plus betting advice and strategies that as well. Don't miss the Better Sports Network Sports Futures Draft. It plays at bettersports.com and on demand with the BSN app, or as I said, bettersports.com. So we didn't talk about this, Jordan, in the first hour, but Dallas Cowboys have let Ezekiel Elliott go. He is going to be a free agent. I have had high stakes players, and I probably said it on this show before, for the last 3 years, saying that Tony Pollard was the better option in that backfield. He was the more talented guy, and he deserved a lot more touches than he got, and Elliott probably should have gotten fewer touches than he got. Now it is the Tony Pollard show there. I got to believe they're going to add somebody on a scale of 0 to 10 in regards to how concerned you are if you're a Pollard owner. On a scale of 0 to 10 being there's no chance they pick him, on a scale of and with 10 being they're going to draft him for sure. What about Bijan Robinson going to Dallas in this draft? Because we know Jerry Jones loves his big running backs. This guy's a super talented player, played his college ball in Texas, and obviously him and Pollard would make up, probably the best 1-2 tandem in the NFL if Robinson lives up to what a lot of people think he's going to be. On a scale of 0 to 10, how concerned are you that could happen?
We'll say a 5. Is that a cop out? I don't know. They pick at 26. I'm not sure he's going to be there. Right. Okay. So that would be the thing. Again, we're in an off season where we don't necessarily know what the NFL is thinking about running back. They just paid a bunch of running backs more than they've paid them in recent years. And so you could say, all right, like maybe that is a sign that there's still some value there and he goes higher. Right. I think that he's probably, if they're going to sit there at 26 and pick the best player available, I think that Bijan Robinson's probably gone. That would be my guess. But I don't know. Like, who knows with what they'll like. They could trade up and like they paid Zeke like $1 gajillion, right? And so they could view him and say like, hey, we want to trade up for this guy. Like that's about as bad of team management as you could do. But it wouldn't shock me. So I don't know. Right? I tend to think though, if they're going to sit there at 26, I don't think that he's going to be there. Okay, and I would agree with you on that. If you're a Pollard owner, are you actually rooting for them to add somebody because Tony Pollard touching the ball 20, 25 times a game, that's just not sustainable for a full season? Don't you want them to add somebody that is going to take a significant amount of touches in the backfield to keep Pollard fresh all year? Yeah, I want it in a way that's not going to right, that leaves Pollard in like a 65-35 split. I like Damian Harris would be the perfect person to go with Pollard, because he's not going to take away what Pollard does really efficiently, and he's going to kind of take the dirty work, right? That kind of profile would be something that I would like, as opposed to where Zeke, like, they could use him kind of interchangeably. You don't really want that if you're Pollard. You want it to be that they're not going to sort of interchangeably use it, because where you're interchangeably using a running back with Pollard, you're taking away from what he does really well. So that would kind of be my take on it. Again, kind of can you get just a guy there? It would be my hope if I'm a Pollard guy. But he's like a top 10 Dynasty running back right now. I mean, coming off an injury on a 1-year franchise tag, and you don't know what they're going to draft, and that's a lot of risk, right? That is a lot of risk.
And so maybe the smart thing to do is to, and I want to get your thoughts on trading Patrick Mahomes away for picks, because I know you've been very vocal about that on Twitter. But your thought process here with Pollard, with all these risks, maybe it's cash and chips time with Tony Pollard, right? Because he is certainly viewed as maybe as high as he ever has been right now, given that there's no Elliott in that backfield. And if you get the right owner, man, you can really get a really good return in exchange for Tony Pollard right now.
Allegedly. You used that word earlier.
Okay.
That was amazing. I have this theory about Tony Pollard that, the mythical future first for Tony Pollard, that people said it happens. And it's like Bigfoot. Like, it doesn't actually exist in real life. Now, I've seen it occasionally, like it's actually picked up a little bit. I mean, that's something that would interest me, right? If you're playing super flex and he's the piece to a quarterback upgrade, right? Going from, way up the board, right? That's a place where I think you should spend a ton of time in Dynasty, is trying to make those quarterback upgrades, and paying for them using guys like Tony Pollard is, I think, really good. It's a sound strategy. So that would be, that's time really well spent right now, right? That's the time of the season. In my Dynasty team building guide, I talked about kind of breaking the offseason up into some different sections, right? Using this time of the offseason to really kind of hammer the how do I get better at the premium positions, right? And super flex in particular, right? This is the time of season to do that, and Pollard's like the perfect player to sort of pay for that upgrade.
Speaking of paying for the upgrade, you had a fantastic rant in regards to Patrick Mahomes on the Football Guys Dynasty show. I've seen it on Twitter as well. I want you to, not necessarily replicate it, but when you talk about trading Mahomes right now in order to get better picks, or in order to upgrade parts of your roster in a super flex league, what would you say to that sort of thought process, that type of mentality?
So there's these videos on Twitter that are kind of amazing, and they're like just crazy things that happen. And usually it's someone doing something really like absurd and then puts themselves in like dangerous peril. I don't pick the ones where people get injured, but like you get the idea. Like, you do something really ridiculous, and then you kind of crash your Mercedes into like a wall, right? Like, that sort of thing. You walk away from it, but you do something really stupid that costs you a lot of money. That's trading Patrick Mahomes in Superflex, right?
I thought that the one I saw was was it the dump truck or the big truck?
Yeah,
lifted
right.
His payload in the back and smashed into an overpass. That was
100%
hilarious. Anyway,
100%.
keep going.
Yeah, just totally not paying attention to what you're doing, and then just do something stupid, and then just it absolutely explodes, right? Yes, that's a good example. There's another one where it was like a guy with like he had like some sort of payload in the back of his truck, and he kind of kept turning it, and he literally turned his truck off a cliff. Like, that's the type of like. So this has become a little bit of a I've spent like way too much time on accounts like this trying to find these funny videos, because it just makes me chuckle. But yeah, those are the types of things, right? Those are the videos that reflect trading Patrick Mahomes. Listen, elite players win, right? Elite players win. And if you get 2 or 3 of them, you'd be astonished at how far they can drag you. Especially, it depends on the format too. In a shallower format like an FFPC, if you get 3 guys that are elite finishers, right? They can drag you all the way, right? They can, because the benches are deep. There's not a huge difference between player 6 and player 20 on your roster. And again, if you're streaming them right, if you're using the right type of roster management principles, there isn't a big difference there. And what you end up getting is a couple of guys can drag you. I wrote about it in the team building guide this year about how I had a situation where it was like Mahomes, Josh Jacobs, and Eckler, right? It was a totally weird build for me. I'm not usually in on running backs, but I got the running backs kind of at a discount, like kind of the way it went. It was just a weird, awkward team build, and it dragged me all the way to a finals, right? I won a championship, but essentially with those guys carrying me, right? There was problems with Stafford, right? I mean, I had all sorts of other issues on that team, but Mahomes is like, we're watching it now. It's like Mahomes is like the college basketball team that makes like 17 threes in a game. Right. He just is a great equalizer, and you're almost never out of a game, and you're probably going to win with him. Right. So that's the way I view him. I view Allen that way. And then it's kind of a tear break for me on the quarterbacks, but spend that time getting those guys, and never, ever, ever like, try and build from depth by trading elite pieces. That's just, I mean, I saw a good one today where the guy was like trying to light a fire in his house, and he poured a bunch of gasoline and then threw a match at it, and it basically exploded his living room. Like, that's the kind of stuff that trading Mahomes is, right? Those are that's the video comp to that. So yeah.
I always think too, and I've talked with other high stakes players over the years, and high stakes dynasty players, and they'll tell me same thing that you said, elite talent over everything else. And I've had some players tell me like they view certain players in Dynasty, and we can take this a step further, besides Superflex, just your regular standard one quarterback leagues, that they view certain players as untradeable. Like, you just cannot get enough in exchange for this player. Think about Christian McCaffrey in his heyday, Justin Jefferson right now. I think you can make a case for Jamar Chase. Like, if you're making a deal and sending those guys out, number one, you're giving up the best player in the trade, which I always hate to do. And then number two, whatever you're getting back, man, it's hard to replace that level of talent, especially if you're trying to, doing it the Moneyball way, where you're trying to replicate Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson's stats in the aggregate, right? You can't really do that. And when you're only starting, 10 players a week, you got to have those elite players in there. And when you get one, you hold on to it like grim death, like you said. And I think if you're once you get these players and develop them and see what they're doing, and then now's the time you want to trade them, that's probably not the best way to do dynasty fantasy football. DJ Moore, sure. let's talk about him because we talked about Herbert, and we talked about D'Onta Foreman in the first hour. But DJ Moore was part of this trade that sent the number 1 overall pick to Carolina. Moore comes to Chicago, catching passes from Justin Fields, who we're going to get into in a little bit. But I think you can make the case that this might be Moore's best quarterback ever. He's going to be surrounded by Darnell Mooney and Chase Claypool. I think were miscast as number 1 and number 2 receivers last year. Now the Bears have a true bona fide number 1 receiver, at least the way I see it. And now I see Moore in Chicago, man. I think this is very exciting for Dynasty. I think that a lot of people probably view it that way. So I don't necessarily know if you can get a deal on him in your trades right now. But as you look into this, the McNamara crystal ball for DJ Moore in 2023, what kind of stats, what kind of numbers, what kind of production are we looking at here from him?
I think DJ Moore is the easiest sell in all of Dynasty.
Really? Okay, here we go.
Yeah, I hate this trade for DJ Moore. I thought it was a great trade for Chicago. I hate the trade for DJ Moore, and I'm a DJ Moore fan. The math just doesn't add up is the problem. Like, this is just a simple math equation. I'm writing a article for Footballguys. So excuse me, I spent like my afternoon writing this. It's been like a 4-day long project. It's like 2,000 words. It's a total, like, I'm going to hand it in and they're going to be like, I don't even know what to do with Jordan on this one. Like, that's the kind of article that it is at this point. But if you start looking at the numbers, it's really like Justin Fields does a couple of things that are really problematic. Okay. Number 1, he takes sacks at a high rate, and number 2, he scrambles at a high rate. So when a quarterback drops back to pass, they have basically 3 things that they can do. They can attempt to pass, they can get sacked, or they can scramble, right? Those are basically your three options. And so I consider that when you drop back to pass and you don't pass, I consider that, I call it a lost drop back. Right, because for a receiver, that's a drop back that there's an attempt that's not being thrown at. at them. And so what you end up seeing with Justin Fields is his career average last year was 28.2% of his dropbacks turned into something other than attempts, which is like by far the biggest number that any quarterback's ever recorded. And then, going back to like 2008, which is when I got my data. And then when you actually look at it for his career, he's at about 25.2. So a quarter of the time when he dropped back, he's either getting sacked or he's scrambling and he's not throwing a pass. The next highest number is 18%, right? That is an enormous efficiency suck out of an offense. And so what you end up seeing is because of what happens with Fields, right? Because he takes so much X, because he scrambles so much, the effect of that is like he was about a league average yards on a per attempt basis. He was actually league average, right? In terms of how many receiving points he generated for his receivers in terms of catches and receiving yards and touchdowns. You just sort of adjust that for his attempts. He's about league average, which is good. The problem is that's not the right denominator, right? Because what you end up seeing, it's the lowest attempts in the league. It's like that bad of a rate, and they're dropping back to pass at an extremely low rate, and he's sucking a quarter of them out of the air, right? And so what you end up seeing is it's just a graveyard. Right. So to give you an idea, like we've complained a lot about the DJ Moore stuff. Carolina's quarterbacks weren't good, but what they didn't do was sort of they weren't good, but they didn't implode him by taking a ton of sacks and taking scrambles. Right. And they threw it at a decent enough rate. Right. They were actually above average in 3 out of his 5 years in terms of passing attempts. And so what happened is that math adds up to he can get to 120 targets. Right. If you take DJ Moore's numbers from last year, right, he had a 25.7% target share. If you apply that to the attempts that Justin Fields threw last year, it's 97 targets. That is 97 targets. He had 118 last year, and he's dropping to 97. Right, that is a dismal outcome. And now you say, okay, well, how does it get better? Right, well, maybe they throw the ball a lot more. Like they're going to really need to drop back to pass a lot more than they did last year because it needs to be a huge increase for Justin Fields because Justin Fields scrambles and he gets sacked so often. So that's a lot of it's just a math problem for him, right? It just becomes a really hard spot for him to really get to 120, 130 targets, which is the most impactful thing. And you look at stuff like scramble rate, you look at sack rate, those things are extremely correlated year over year, right? And so I mean, this is a lot of math flying in the face of it's a really strong breeze directly into DJ Moore's face in terms of all the efficiencies and all just the geeky math stuff, like just the targets. The long and short of it is to kind of sum it up, the targets just don't add up. Right, the target number just doesn't get there for him. That's my concern.
So you're making a pretty strong case here against DJ Moore right now in Dynasty. Bennett Carroll, our producer, wants to know, and I'm gonna expound upon this a little bit. There's still time in free agency to sign some offensive linemen. They still have the draft to improve the offensive line, and the Bears have a lot of draft capital, and they actually even have more of it now since this Carolina trade. And they have a lot of money to spend as well. If they do improve the offensive line, either through free agency or through the draft, does that mean that he's going to have fewer sacks and fewer scrambles, fewer forced scrambles, as Bennett put it? Or are you looking at what you just said, like the sack rate, scramble, like this is correlated year after year. So maybe you're a little bit bearish on even if they improve the offensive line, it doesn't necessarily have Justin Fields changing his stripes.
Yeah, he's at 25.2%. And just look at the guys that are the next step down from him. It's Tyrod Taylor, Mike Vick, Colin Kaepernick, and Deshaun Watson. Those are basically the next 4 guys. And they're, we'll say, between 18 and 17%, right? That's where they sit. So again, that's already a huge impact. A couple of points. Number one, there's actually data that I'm not going to put a ton of weight into it because there's other data to suggest that maybe it's not necessarily all the most compelling stuff. But when you look at some actually publicly available offensive line stats for Chicago, ESPN does a metric called pass block win rate, which is basically how how you win early, right? In the first 2.5 seconds, right? Which is where, the first 2.5 seconds of a drop back basically are the offensive linemen getting beat. They ranked second in that stat last year.
Yeah.
So that was actually a stat where I literally tweeted, "Am I hallucinating?" Because I was like, I thought something was wrong with me. But the stat basically measures, can you sustain their blocks for 2.5 seconds or longer? The problem with Justin Fields is a couple of things. Number one, he takes forever to throw. Right, by far the most time to throw of any quarterback in the league. Right, he's at 3.4 seconds. He was about 3.2 in college. That's who he is. The other thing I would say is, like, you put him in Ohio State where he was an elite, right, surrounded by elite guys, Olave, Garrett Wilson, Jackson Smith, and Jigba. Right, their offense was so good that Jameson Williams had to transfer. Right, that's how good their offense was. It was still 18%. Right. So he was still above the next guys. Again, he was like the bottom 6 percentile in the stat. Right. I mean, it's just what he is, man. That's my concern with him. And if he's going to be, you look at the quarterbacks in that, like the Tyrod Taylor, the Mike Vicks, the Kaepernicks. I mean, Deshaun Watson did, but it was a little bit different. But those other guys, like, they've had a really, really hard time sustaining fantasy production. Right. Just the shape of them. And Fields is like magnitudes worse. Right. Like, it's just a lot of, like, he's way, way out there. So that's my concern with him. Even if he gets better, incrementally, it's still a massive, massive drop on the offense.
And when you talk about that 25% too, and then you obviously mentioned the quarterbacks, that Tyrod Taylor's, Mike Vicks, Deshaun Watson's of the world, even if it gets a little bit better where he is throwing the ball more, he is dropping back more and actually throwing it rather than scrambling, even if that 25% number comes down a little bit, it's still significantly higher than those other guys, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing to keep in mind here too, because even if it does get better, even if the Bears do improve upon that, even if Fields improves upon that, even if it's a significant number, it may not be significant enough for him to keep DJ Moore as a fantasy stud, as a top 12, top 15 receiver this coming year. So that's good knowledge there. And we'll look forward
Can I give you another stat just to tell you the effect
please.
of it?
Go ahead. Yeah.
So if you actually look at Justin Fields and you take Tampa Bay's number, so Tampa Bay led the league in dropbacks. And you say, okay, even if they drop back to pass that many times, okay, which was north of 770, if Justin Fields does the same thing where it's about a 25% rate, right? It's his lost dropback rate's about 25%. And you take DJ Moore's target rate from last year, which again was 25% of their 25.7% of their targets. If you take all that math, that's again leading the league in dropbacks. 143 targets for DJ Moore.
Wow.
Right. That's excellent, but that is expecting everything to change, right? That is expecting the whole shape of that's how you would get to him being like in the wide receiver 1 range of targets. Like, that's how extreme of a change that you would have to get. So either Fields needs to drastically change or the offense needs to drastically change, but it's a lot of DJ Moore problems running into, it's a real strong headwind for him.
So, and I feel like we got the cliff notes on the article that you're producing for Footballguys. I will be setting aside a week and a half so I can read the whole thing and understand why I need to be selling DJ Moore in Dynasty right now.
It sharpened my game. Maybe I'll come up with a little bit more concise version of it now that we've talked it through.
Well, brevity isn't always best. Sometimes you got to really expound on everything too. So, ESPN reported this would have been, I think, this morning. Yeah, this morning, actually. Chase Edmonds is now a Tampa Bay Buccaneer, 1 year, $1.08 million. Leonard Fournette expected to be cut there, and Chase Edmonds will pair with Rachaad White. I think this is good for Rachaad White owners and the people who have him in their dynasty leagues, because this is a complementary running back to Rachaad White. This is not a duplication of skills where they might be sharing the backfield. I think this is great news for Rachaad White for Dynasty. Not really, I'm kind of whatever on Chase Edmonds on this deal, but man, this could be a big year for Rachaad White if the Buccaneers and Baker Mayfield can really get this team competing in the NFC South. Rachaad White could have a big year.
He absolutely could. And you start looking at these scenarios and you start, some of the stuff that I did in my team building guide this past year, I released it earlier in the off season. I started looking at some stuff like I call it survivor rate and threat rate, and you look at how likely is it for a team to actually draft someone ahead of where they drafted a guy last year, for example, right? So you start looking at a guy like Rachaad White. It's really low. It's like less than 20% odds that a team actually spends more draft capital on them than they spend on Rachaad White, that they spend more draft capital this year on a running back. But when you start dropping to day 3, like guys like Khalil Herbert, some of these other guys, even a guy like Ramondre Stevenson, it's like a 30% number, basically all throughout his rookie contract, right? If he doesn't get someone drafted over him, there's a 30% chance the following year. And if it doesn't happen again, there's another 30% chance, right? It's basically that same sustained threat. It's a lot lower for a guy like Rachaad White. So if this is kind of like, hey, we need a guy here and we need him to basically be able to do, Edmonds can kind of do everything. I don't think he's a direct threat to a high workload for White, but he's almost like a smaller version of Samaje Perine, right? Where we talked about Perine could basically run, he could catch, he can kind of do everything. That's kind of the role that Edmonds could fit into. And, maybe he's a potential injury away. Again, I would ask the same question. Is this the beginning or the end? I think this kind of looks like more of the end version of what this backfield could look like more than it does look like the beginning of some sort of, multiple running back additions.
One of the great things at analyticsofdynasty.com, Jordan McNamara's website, you follow him on Twitter at Jordan McNamara, is the Dynasty Team Building Guide. We're going to get into some of that guide coming up in our final segment. We're going to talk about the best way to run your rookie drafts, what you need to be doing, and how do you need to attack startup drafts. How do you, when you take over an orphan, how do you rebuild it? You think about all the teams, the orphan teams at myffpc.com that you can get for cheap right now. He's going to give you some tips on that. And then we'll talk about everybody's favorite part about Dynasty, trades, how not to get taken advantage of, how maybe to take advantage of and get the best in deals. Just little tips and tricks and stuff like that. He's going to share some of what you can learn more about at analyticsofdynasty.com. I'm Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship. We're going to be coming back and getting into, I said this with Chad a couple of weeks ago, we've had Dynasty 101, Jordan, with you. Now we're getting to Dynasty 201 in this final segment, not for the faint of heart. It's all coming up on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, only on the Better Sports Network.
Monday Night Rants with Edward Rouse on Better Sports Network.
Do you believe in the Madden curse? Do you think that's a real thing?
I did. Now, I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore, but it was a real thing for a solid 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it was Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson, Peyton Hillis.
LT was never on the cover. I know that.
Was he not? I thought he was one. Okay, well, you do know all the covers of everything.
Yeah, okay. So if you want, I could do this real quick. So Garrison Hurst is the first official Madden cover athlete, 1999. 2000, I believe they still put John Madden on the cover. And then 2001 is where it all started. So 2001, you have Eddie George. 2002, Dante Culpepper. 2003, Marshall Faulk. 04, Michael Vick. 05, Ray Lewis, first defensive player on the cover.
Okay.
06, Donovan McNabb. 07, Sean Alexander.
Okay.
08, Vince Young. 09, Brett Favre.
Okay.
10 is a trick one because it's
no way you know.
And Larry Fitzgerald. 11, Drew Brees. 12, Peyton Hillis. 13, Calvin Johnson, I believe so.
You're right.
14.
No way you know all this.
14, also a trick question. I believe that's the Madden 25 cover, and it's Barry Sanders, unless you got it for the new consoles, in which case Adrian Peterson
oh my God.
was on the cover.
You're not cheating. You're not looking at...
Swear on my life. Swear on my life.
Okay, keep on going.
15, you have Richard Sherman.
Okay.
16, hold on. 16 is Odell Beckham.
Okay.
16. 17, now this is the one I get mixed up because 17 and 18 are back-to-back Patriots.
They are.
17, I think, is Gronk, and 18 is Brady.
You are correct.
19 is Antonio Brown.
Correct.
20, Patrick Mahomes.
Oh my goodness.
21, Lamar Jackson. 22, Brady Mahomes. 23, John Madden. But yeah, dude, I'm a cover nerd when it comes to this stuff.
We now know, but that was really impressive. I don't know how.
Thank you.
That's literally 29 of them or something like that. Wow, that is That is, you did not miss a single one, and you even got the special editions where they had 2 people on the covers.
Monday Night Rants on Better Sports Network. It's High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
Normally, I would say we have 27 minutes of Dynasty goodness left on the Better Sports Network tonight, but that's not the case, because when we're done here, Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds crew will take over for another 2 hours of nothing but Dynasty talk. We're getting it done here on the Better Sports Network right now on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. I am Eric Balkman from the Fantasy Football Players Championship, the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and of course the road of his High Stakes Lowdown. He is my co-host tonight. He is known as Jordan McNamara. Follow him on Twitter at McNamara Dynasty, analytics of Dynasty.com, and of course, Footballguys.com and the Football Guys Dynasty show that comes out each and every Tuesday night over at Football Guys, as well as wherever you get podcasts. I want to talk about Dynasty fantasy football and what you offer in your team building guide. Before I do that, you're going to be able to use this information to your advantage, viewers, because you can adopt the Dynasty Orphan today with the FFPC. Discounted teams are available, ranging from $77 all the way up to $2,500. Go to myffpc.com, myffpc.com. So drop down at the top that says Dynasty Leagues, and then if you click on that, there's another link that says the Orphans, and you can pick whatever Orphan team, buy it with a click of a button, and manage that to greatness, as it were. So I guess there's a question I want to ask you about variance, but I want to save that. I'm going to save that for the end, Jordan. I want to talk about, number one, what is the Dynasty team building guide at analytics of Dynasty.com? Can you give us the quick and dirty on just the overall, like what people are going to see once they get inside that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a strategy guide, right? This is my 5th one. I do a yearly one, and each year it's kind of a little bit different topics. This year I kind of was like debating if I wanted to do a 5th one. I'd done 4, and I kind of had scratched the surface of a lot of stuff, and I answered a lot of my questions, and I kind of came back and said, I don't really have sort of a grand theory all in one place, right? I had it in my head. Let me write it on paper. So this is a lot of stuff about different ways to think about your team. I think there's a lot of things in Dynasty that people believe that are true. And if you sort of understand that, that's a great way to deviate. Right. So there's a lot of that, right? Some different team building examples, some rules to follow in terms of startup drafts, rookie drafts, some different numbers to kind of keep in mind and think about in terms of tracking progress on players, right? Some different there's a whole I have basically a cheat sheet of all the stuff on one page, right? I sort of challenged myself to a one pager, and it took an immense amount of time. It's like, what's the saying? I'd write you a shorter letter, but I didn't have sufficient time, right? That was kind of one of those things. It took me an incredible amount of time to condense it all to one page. And then honestly, the thing that I'm maybe most proud of is I had subscribers write stuff, right? 2 of my subscribers who have been longtime subscribers, came aboard a while ago in terms of the AOD journey and have been along the way. And I've seen, some really good growth from my subscribers, and I was really proud to see 2 of them write for me, which was really awesome. And I think that shows it's just not me telling stories. It's other people kind of, hey, here's how it works. Here's kind of how we did it. Here's how we implemented it. And I think a lot of people got value out of it. So yeah, you can find it all at analyticsdynasty.com/shop. It's right there, the team building guide.
And now you have subscribers writing for you. Clearly, this is the McVay coaching tree of Dynasty Analytics. The McNamara analyst tree has now been planted. The roots are being sowed, and the tree is expanding. So congratulations to you on that. I want to talk to you about rookie drafts right now. In fact, about 2 months from, I think it's 2 months from this Saturday, we're going to have 1,200 plus rookie drafts going off at the FFPC. And I think I want to frame this question. Number one, just general tips for rookie drafts. And I know we don't have any rookie drafts to look at right now, Jordan, but when you talk about this year's rookie draft specifically, what are some things that people should already be thinking about and already get into their mind now so they're well prepared?
I caught myself doing this past week, and someone asked me a question. I kind of talked like a lot about the specific receiver that I like as being the wide receiver one of this class. And then I put the brakes on myself and I said, well, what's the, one of the things that we know is that we have an incredibly hard time picking wide receivers in rookie drafts, when you have to sort out the same pedigree. So what do I mean by that? First round wide receivers have basically performed randomly in terms of odds of producing a future hit. Right. So if they're picked at 6 or if they're picked at 26, that hasn't really been predictive. Neither, by the way, has Dynasty ADP, which you would think, hey, we kind of know the order these guys go off the board. And we sort of know additional stuff about situation and all that other stuff. We should be able to beat randomness, and we don't. So that gives me a lot of pause about, I haven't started preparing for rookie drafts yet. Because the lesson that I learned from that is we're spending too much time doing that. We should be doing other things, right? We should be saying, instead of taking one bet that I really like, I'm just going to take 2 of them that are equally priced, right? Mm-hmm. Sort of those things, right? That's kind of the way, people are like, who's your rookies? And I'll be like, you got to ask me closer to the draft. I'm not there yet, that's kind of the stuff the way that I look at rookie drafts, right? I'm just trying to increase my odds. And I think you got to be really careful about picking favorites, right? Especially at receiver, right? Running back's a little bit different. Just don't pick San Francisco ones, and that'll improve your odds. It's a common problem that I've run into recently, but just stuff like that, just kind of understanding your odds. First round quarterbacks, top 10 quarterbacks in the NFL draft haven't performed. The same rule applies, right? The order they've gone off in the draft hasn't really been predictive. The order that we take them in dynasty drafts hasn't really been predictive. And so you sit here thinking, all right, I go back to that 2020 class, right? And there was Burrow, there was Swift went at the top of that, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, there was JT. But then you looked at the back half of that round, and it was Herbert and it was Justin Jefferson, and arguably on par with anyone else in that class. Right. And they fit exactly what we just said. They were the random shots in that range that the other guys are going a lot more expensive at. And I think that's a really good lesson to take. Those running backs from that class, there was 5 of them that went in the second round: Jonathan Taylor, Akers, Dobbins, and Swift. There was one other one that everyone treated way differently, and it was Dillon. And you want to know what? Dillon has hit before Dobbins and before Akers have hit. And he went a round plus later in rookie drafts, right? So sort of being in on profiles and being patient on profiles and sort of looking at players like that, I think makes a lot of sense, and it'll improve your odds.
Do you think, because you talked a lot about the stuff that's not predictive with rookies when we look at the past rookie drafts and dynasty performances, have you stumbled on any patterns? Have you stumbled on anything that has been predictive that maybe you can get a leg up on your competition? Like, well, okay, if you look at this, this has a history of this section of players who fit this criteria have a history of hitting or have a history of busting. Either way, good or bad. Have you stumbled on anything that has been predictive?
The most predictive thing is draft pedigree. So, as what I was mentioning before, like first round wide receivers, they perform randomly within the tier, but first round wide receivers, when you sort of look at them, it's about 55%. That's a lot more likely to hit than a second rounder who's about 35%, right? So that's the most kind of important thing, right? So when in doubt, draft the guy that went higher in the NFL draft. Yeah. It's usually a pretty good rule in dynasty rookie drafts. When in doubt, don't take a guy that was drafted on day 3, right? Like those are some simple things that just sort of to improve your odds, right? But then at wide receiver, I look for, how early did you break out, right? And there's some different ways you can measure that. Dominator rating's a good one. I just look, how soon did you get on the board for a 20% dominator breakout? Dominator is basically how big of a market share, how much of the receiving yards at your school you had, and how much of the receiving yards of the touchdowns did you have? How many receiving touchdowns did you have as a percentage of your teams? And then you divide that by 2, and you get the average of the 2 numbers, and that's kind of your dominator rating, right? If you can get that over 20% when you're 18, 19 years old, and you're drafted in the top couple of rounds of the NFL draft, your odds of success are pretty good. If you don't do that, right, then your odds of success a lot less good, right? So those are some just easy sort of things to get in mind. I like running backs that can break tackles, and I like running backs that can catch, right? So those are really the things that I kind of look for to help me improve my odds.
Do you ever put any stock into what you see at the combine? I've been big on the last couple of years relative athletic score. Obviously, I know speed score people have been talking about for years as well. And then the agility drills to me mean a lot more than the 40 times as well. Do you put how much? I guess I should ask, how much stock do you put into those numbers?
Yeah. So what you find is draft. So athleticism predicts draft pedigree. But once you control for draft pedigree, it's not predictive. So again, the same kind of rule applies, right? It'll make, if you run 4.24, it's more likely that you get drafted in the first round of the NFL draft. Once you get drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, you're running 4.24 versus someone drafted in the first round running 4.54, not predictive. Right. So that's the kind of way that I would view that. Right. So that's kind of the way that I think about that. And again, that's a good way to keep yourself honest, right? Because we get our biases, right? We get all these things, right? We pick our favorites, and each year I try and pick favorites less. I try and pick favorite players less and less each year, because I know kind of the way is to treat them as assets and to treat them, it's price sensitive and all that stuff, and to just try and treat them, as profiles more than individual specific players that I'm following head over heels for each rookie draft season.
So I want to talk about startup drafts here. And I think I brought this up with Chad. I could be wrong, but I know I've talked about it with a lot of Dynasty analysts out there. There's a guy who's been playing in the FFPC basically ever since we started Dynasty. His name's Norm Cruz. He is an attorney out of somewhere in Ohio. I think it's Cleveland. I'm not sure, but it's somewhere in Ohio. His name is that he uses for all of his drafts, for all his team names, is Cavalier King Charles. And he has this method that we now call the CKC method, or the Cavalier King Charles method. He'll get into these Dynasty startups, and he will trade away a lot of his picks in the startup draft for first-round rookies the following year. So he'll be competitive, or maybe he'll take it on the chin in year one, but year two, he has all these first-round rookie picks, and then all of a sudden, year 3, year 4, year 5, if he hits on them, which he's a pretty smart guy, so he does hit on a lot of them, he's looking really good to be competing for years after that. Your thoughts on that method, and whether you've ever done it, and anything else that you could recommend our viewers to make sure that they're, mistakes they're not making in startup drafts, and then things they should be taking advantage of.
I think format matters with that, right? I think it's in a shorter roster. I think that's actually a better strategy because a first round rookie pick, right? If you only can keep a certain amount of play, right? If you're playing a 40-man roster and you can dump a first round pick on top of it, has less of an impact, right? But if you're keeping 10, 12, 14 guys, right? I play in a 7-man keeper league, right? Those first rounders, it's a 16 teamer too, right? If I can hit on a top 4, top 3, top 2 pick, if I could hit on 101, right? That's a massive impact, right? Because I'm getting actually an additional keeper. It's kind of how I view that. And so I think it matters a little bit on the league side. So I do like it a little bit more in FFP. And by the way, if you're trading away the pick, right? And let's just say you pick someone in the, instead of picking someone in the 5th round, you pick them in the 20th round. That's a lot different of a drop than it is to go from 5th round to 28th round, right? I mean, there's a gap, right? That you can stream from that there's guys each week that you can pick up and start in FFPC formats, where it might be tougher if you're playing 35, 40 man, right? So that's just you're just talking a different replacement level. So it makes it a lot harder. It makes it a lot different, right? So I do think there's value in it. I typically don't do that. I used to be in on the productive struggle. I think if you're playing a 1 quarterback, I think you can do it. If you're playing super flex, the problem with doing it in a super flex format, I wrote in my last year's guide that I thought that it was is basically an extinct strategy in super flex, because the problem at super flex is the most predictive thing of success in super flex is I've already done it. Right. So if you have a quarterback that's done it a couple of times, right, the quarterback that's hit 3 times for a top 12 seasonal finish, like the Herbert profile, right, that's as durable as you'll find in basically all of Dynasty. And that should be very valuable in a super flex format. It's going to go high, and so as opposed to you're trying to take a top 10 guy in a rookie draft, where those are that's the worst bet you can make in terms of trying to hit on somebody. And then you kind of find yourself like, all right, now I'm chasing, right? So at the cost of, right. So in Superflex, I don't think sort of playing, kicking the can down the road for future assets, because it's going to harm my quarterbacks, right? I'm just going to draft good quarterbacks early, and then they're going to kind of keep me in it. And then I can kind of, build my team around that. That's how I view it in Superflex. In Start 1, I think it's a different game. I think you can play that in Start 1 just because the long-term assets, they're receivers, right? And I think that outside of the top couple, they're largely replaceable. And so you start looking at that. And again, how much you trust at running back, right? So trading down from those positions isn't as costly.
All right. So you play Dynasty, you do the startup draft, you love it. You're getting involved in rookie drafts and you're loving the rookie drafts. Let's say you want to get in another league and there's no startups that you're liking, but you find a team that you're willing to take over. Maybe you get it at a discount, right? And you're like, I'm going to do this. I'm going to rebuild this team to a championship level. I'm going to resurrect it. Sometimes that I found that more fulfilling than, taking a championship in a startup or, a team that I drafted myself. Sometimes taking an orphan team that really is in, disarray to win a title with that's more fulfilling sometimes. What are the tips that you can give us from, stuff that we maybe would see in the team building guide, analytics with dynasty.com? What are some of the tips that you need to understand if you want to rebuild this team, quickly and to have a stable future as well for years past that? What are some of the things that we need to know about?
Optimizing your roster construction is super important, right? So that'll just elevate your floor and your ceiling, right? So having a lot more running backs than wide receivers, it will just elevate both your floor and your ceiling. And you can do it relatively quickly. You guys like P. Ryan, Jamal Williams was a free agent in spots last year, heading into last year. Right? Just sort of adding those guys. And the deal with those is like they can instantly, if you've got 5, 6, 7, 8 of them, right, every week you're starting or streaming one of them just basically by the odds of it that someone's injured or whatever in front of them, suspended, injured, whatever. In front of them, you're going to get a spot start here, you're going to get a spot start there, and you can kind of stream those guys through, and that can really add up. So proper roster construction, I think, is really important. What are you trying to accomplish? I've taken over some orphans and I say, my goal on this is just to learn how to trade with players that I don't usually roster. So in that, I might pick some different guys, right? I might look at a different team build and say, this has value for me, right? From a writing perspective, even, you know what I mean? Just, I kind of view some of these things a little bit differently as a content creator, but I'm looking for different things, right? I tend to look at, if I want to take one over and kind of win, like give me the 2 or 3 guys that I really, really like, and let me see if I can build around it, right? If there's a Mahomes orphan, like, give it to me, right? Like I can figure, is there an Allen orphan? Give it to me, right? Like that's really close to already making the playoffs, right? If I can screw it up a lot and be really close to making the playoffs just with those guys, that's how big of an impact it can have. So that would be kind of the way that I would look at it, right? And again, I never want to punt a year. So I'm constantly thinking about, I took over a couple of orphans last year that I wasn't, that didn't ultimately end up going well, but I paid like nothing for them. And
Right.
It was worth like, the expected value on that's really good, right? You don't have to win very many of those to really turn a big profit. And it just didn't work out, but I wasn't in for much. And so that's kind of the way that I look at them as well, right? I'm always kind of trying to be in the season, right? I never really punt a season unless I kind of fall out of it during the season. But there's so much uncertainty right now that there's so much variance that's going to go on right now in terms of the things that we believe at this time last year that by August were totally different. I just think that by kicking the can on a season now, you're really harming yourself. So I'm always kind of in it, contending, trying to be in it right now. And again, then like if you're in it in the playoffs, like last year's the greatest example maybe we've ever had. Guys that were hurt. Cup was out. Heck, Jalen Hurts. You know how many 1 seeds had Jalen Hurts on it and then didn't make a finals because he didn't play? Derrick Henry sat in your fantasy playoffs. There was just absolute carnage for the top teams last year in terms of how they went. We can't predict that. So give me a shot, give me a chance to get into the playoffs, and we'll figure it out later on.
The other, and I think this is what everybody loves best about Dynasty. With the FFPC, the only leagues that you can trade in are Dynasty leagues, and trading is a lot of fun. 2-part question here. Number 1, how can our viewers become better Dynasty traders? And number 2, where do you stand on the usage of Dynasty trade calculators in trade discussions?
So the best way to become a better Dynasty GM is to go get the Dynasty team building guides. That's number 1. Number 2, I think the Dynasty trade calculators are a lot like training wheels, right? And my daughter's trying to learn how to ride a bike, and I can't get her to just take the damn training wheels off and just ride it. You're going to be fine. Just press the pedals and go forward. But she gets so psyched out by it, she can't really do it without him. I worry that that's how Dynasty trade calculators impact people, right? You can look at profiles and you think, you look at a trade and you should think, hey, what's this really doing for me? What's it accomplishing, right? Is it the right type of profiles? And you should be able to look at it and kind of say, hey, like that's the right side to be on. Right. And then, if you want a calculator kind of check your math, then that's fine. The problem with it is you don't know what the trade calculators, a lot of times black boxes. You don't know what's A, going into them, and B, what they're solving for. Right. What's your trade calculator of choice solving for? Is it solving for future value? Is it solving for future production? Is it solving for current production? You don't know. Right. If you don't know that, you're just being beholden to a number. And I don't really like to do that. Right. I want to be on the right side. And again, it's putting someone else's values in terms of strategy on my team. And like my teams look very different, right? Most people roster more wide receivers than running backs. I never do that. And as a result, running backs are a lot more valuable to me than they are to other people because I see an edge and I want to embrace it. And, those calculators aren't operating with those assumptions. So that's kind of my take on calculators. I think they have a place, but I think they become too relied on.
Is there, do you ever, when you're either sending out an offer or getting an offer in, your team, the other person's team as well, but do you ever look at a trade calculator? Okay, well, what does this say just for a frame of reference? Or are Dynasty teams and leagues so specialized that for a guy like you who plays in a ton of Dynasty leagues and has been for a while, do they just not hold value for you anymore to be using?
Oh, I'm sure people there's people that definitely value them. Knowing if someone else is using it, right? Sometimes you'll get an offer, you'll see an offer and you'll be like, what the, and I'll kick it along to my subscribers and be like, what is this? Right? Who is sending me this? Why are they sending me this? And they'll say, well, this is this is trade calculator X. And you say, okay, well, craft me back an offer that I would accept that I'm on the right side of, what would you guys do in this situation? Right. You sort of use, you kind of kick it back to them. So that's that's how I weaponize it. But for me, again, I don't think there's anything wrong with them, but you got to not be dependent on them is kind of my thought. And, you're playing a game, play the game. Don't let someone else's algorithm play it for you.
I always say that too. Not even with Dynasty, when people ask me advice on, hey, should I pick this guy up? Should I cut this guy? Should I start this guy, sit this guy? I'm like, well, here's what I would do. But remember, it's your team. And part of the enjoyment of fantasy football is you run your own team. You tweeted something out recently, and I wanted to see if you can give me an example of this. Buying on the low side of variance and selling on the high side of variance, kind of one of the keys to winning on the edges for Dynasty fantasy football. Can you give us a real life example of something like that right now?
George Pickens. George Pickens had the best contested catch rate of any wide receiver last year. That stat is highly variable from year to year. It doesn't predict success in the future. And so what you're basically buying is a contested catch guy that's entirely dependent on that, basically, who doesn't get targeted that much on non-contested routes. You're basically totally on his price is almost entirely based on the fact that he caught a lot of contested balls last year, and that stuff's highly variable from year to year, right? Sell on the high side of that. Deontay Johnson, same offense, right? Just scored 0 touchdowns last year. What PFF projected him for 6.6, I think is the math. It's between 6 and 7. And he scored 0. He's the most catches of a wide receiver to ever not score a touchdown in a season. Right? That's on the bad side of variance. Right? He's on the cheap side of variance. He's on the downside of variance, and I would expect him to massively bounce back. He's the type of player that can lead the league in targets, right? He's been sort of in that conversation before. Give me that guy when he's discounted. So that would be sort of my example of that.
Analyticsofdynasty.com, at McNamara Dynasty on Twitter. The Footballguys Dynasty show, Tuesday nights, anywhere you get podcasts. Am I forgetting anything? Is that everything? Where else can we get your content? Oh, footballguys.com.
Footballguys.com. Analytics of Dynasty as a subscription. You can go on there. You can get the book. It's a standalone book. It's an ebook. You can immediate download. But also my subscription, 360 podcasts last year. We have a Dynasty Trade Finder. I'm going for 380 this year. So Dynasty Trade Finder, all my tiers, all my strategy and everything like that. You can get that all over at analyticsdynasty.com.
So much great stuff from you, Jordan. Thank you so much for being a part of the show. Appreciate it.
Eric, thanks so much for having me.
Absolutely. That'll do it for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show, ladies and gentlemen. MyFFPC.com is where to go for the Never Too Early Best Ball tournaments, Dynasty teams. Of course, MyFFPC.com, you're home for that as well. I want to thank Jordan McNamara. I want to thank Bennett Carroll for being a part of the show tonight. We'll be back at 7, 6 Central next Thursday. And, of course, Garrett Price and the Dynasty Nerds is up next on the Better Sports Network.